not hearing me on that side? No? And there I was thinking that I was projecting my voice. You can hear me now? Please be seated.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, is raring to hear from you. You would have heard him this morning during the induction ceremony, stating a lot of things about how we should view ourselves and our country and our own responsibility. First thing he said, taking responsibility for your education. Sometimes education has to be a mortgage that you think of long term. So those who are thinking of going on to the master's level and certainly the doctoral level, think in that way. Also, the conversation has to start about how we treat with our society in terms of safety and security. The Prime Minister touched on that, and you would have recognized as well that there were a few bills that he tabled in Parliament during his budget presentation. So he wants to hear your views on all those matters involving us as Jamaicans. How do we partner together to make Jamaica the greatest place on earth? And so, ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce once more the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness.
I think I have this. All right, so they told me that this was a special audience and that I'm going to get some tough questions. But I'm prepared for tough questions. But that doesn't mean you should ask them. So in my response to Professor Beckles and Principal MacDonald, for Professor Beckles, the real issue was that you could have economic growth, but the growth may not spread equitably because there are institutional obstacles that create inequality. One of the greatest institutional obstacles that creates inequality is actually the lack of education. So, from my perspective, from the Minister of Education's perspective, I think from any well-thinking person, education is freely available. It doesn't mean that education is free. It doesn't mean that you are not going to pay for it. What we are saying is that at the time in your life cycle when you need education, access it. How you pay for it could be later on in life, when you are in another segment of your life cycle where you're earning. So our policy, government's policy, is to ensure that every single Jamaican in their 18th birthday should be able to freely access education. Early childhood, primary, secondary. That's the policy of the government. And it should be compulsory so. That means that every single Jamaican between their 3rd birthday and their 18th birthday should be enrolled and attending an educational institution. That's the policy of the government. Clearly, we're not there yet. I think we have universal enrollment at the primary school level. We have close to universal enrollment at the early childhood level. At the high school level, the figures vary. I know it is increasing. When I was Minister of Education, it moved from about 60% to somewhere in the region of 75%. I believe now it is in the high 80s. So we're getting towards universal education at the secondary level. Not quite sure what the statistics are for tertiary. I gather it is somewhere about 30% of the age cohort. It should be more. In fact, if Jamaica is going to actually get growth, we need to be probably closer to 70%. Now, how do we get there? I guess I have to answer that question. Well, firstly, I want you to recognize that you are in an age cohort in Jamaica at a time when the government faces very strict budget constraints. I use the term age cohort instead of generation, because I like to think that we are the same generation, but you are just in a different age cohort. But the reality that your generation has to deal with is the fixed budget government. The reality is that for the last 3 years, last 4 years, and maybe for the next 4 years, the government has to commit to reducing our debt to GDP. And it is coming down nicely. We dedicate 7% of our GDP every year to paying down debt. It means that the government has to maintain very strict fiscal management policies. So if we were to decide that we're going to increase the budget for the university, it automatically means that we have to reduce the budget for something else. That's the reality. So the question is, how do we get universities to increase their access without creating a fiscal deficit? Because we can't borrow the money. There's no borrowing to do it anymore. So the issue is, for me, how do we use the current subsidy that we give to universities more efficiently? So the current subsidy per student does not revolve. What do I mean by this? So the government every year, help me, Minister Reid, I believe gives about between $10 and $11 billion to universities. That's the budget of the government. But that subsidy, when it is broken down for a student at the University of the West Indies, may account for somewhere in the region of 60 to 70% of the economic cost. Principal McDonald, am I on the ball there? So let me stand up. On average. Yeah. And in fact, UTech would be about the same, if not a little bit lower. Right. So the economic cost that the government gives the subsidy that the government gives does not cover the full economic cost. And the universities have been very good at financing the gap by the commercial activities that they undertake, which they plow back into the operations to make it more affordable. And then, of course, students carry another part of that cost by the tuition you pay. Are we still at 20%? 20%. So students pay 20% of the economic cost. I'm actually surprised that it is 30 to 35. Yeah. But it reinforces the point that I'm making, because when I was Minister of Education, it was a little higher than 30 to 35. And what has happened is that the government's budget is declining relative to the cost. So even if the government wanted to do more, the reality is, the inevitability is that the part of the subsidy that the government gives is declining. So the question is, how do we leverage this decline, the value of this declining subsidy? my take on it is that we could leverage that subsidy by having it revolve. So what it would mean is this. The government could take the money that it allocates to the university, and it could say, what am I paying for? The university, for the government, is giving several services. The first service it gives, and I'm speaking now for the University of the West Indies, is that it serves as part of the regional bond. I can't see the region existing without the University of the West Indies. CARICOM. So the university plays that important role as that agent that keeps us together as a region. And there is a value for that. The second is the creation of the human capital. It is quite distinct from, let's say, the skill that you have as a doctor or as an information technology expert. But it is just the thinking and the ethos and your behavior as a Jamaican, your intellectual capacity to think and create ideas to make Jamaica a better place. Without having a university, regardless of your particular disciplines and skills, we wouldn't have that in our society. And so government should pay for that. The third service that the university gives is research and development. The government has to support research and development. That is what is going to drive innovation and new technology, the creation of new products. That builds up the store of value of the intellectual capacity of the country. Right? And that store of value is reflected in the number of new patents that we create, or the new drugs that we create, or the new technologies that we create. The fourth thing that the university gives as a service is training. That's specific to your discipline. So you may train as a doctor, you may train as a teacher, you may train as an attorney, you may train in the fine arts, somebody else may train in anthropology, somebody else may train in being a pharmacist. Now, the question that we should ask is training a public good? In a way, yes, it is a public good, but it is divisible. So because it's divisible, you can pay for it. We can identify you are being trained, and this is the cost of the training. So how the government should give the subsidy is those things that are not divisible. For example, I can't divide up the value of keeping CARICOM together. That's just one lump sum notional value. I can't divide the value of building the intellectual capital, that human capital. I can't divide that up. I may be able to competitively distribute research and development. Because I could say to Principal Archie, tell the government the top 10 projects that you're working on this year, or the top 20 projects. We might be able to fund 10 of them. Send me the proposals, and we will look at them, and we will select the best projects that we think would be in the government's interest, and we'll fund those. So the university wouldn't be deprived of public funding. But the divisible part of the public good is training. So what the universities would now be faced with is that the government could say the subsidy that we give as part of the economic cost, we'll put that in the student loan, and we'll keep putting that in the student loan every year. All that would now be needed is once you matriculate, once you write to the university and say, I want to study medicine, I want to study whatever it is, the university looks at your qualification, says you are qualified, we'll accept you, there is space. The next step is you go to your student loan bureau. There would be no need for anything such as a guarantor. The interest rates would be extremely low. You would pay when you start to work. The terms would be equivalent to those of a mortgage. And if you decide to study in areas that the government determines to be in the national interest or that there is a severe shortage, then the concessions would be even greater. So in effect, what we would have done is to move the subsidy from training as what we call a dead subsidy, we just give it to you this year and it doesn't revolve, into a more dynamic subsidy that you go, you borrow everything from the student loan, your payback would probably be the equivalent of what you are paying back now because the term would be stretched out over a longer period of time. The interest rates would be very low. In that way, we could overnight expand the number of students getting into university. But there are some cultural things that we would need to overcome. Firstly, I am like all other Jamaicans. I don't like to borrow. And I've heard the horror stories of people taking student loan and then the difficulties in paying that back. That's a structural issue that can be addressed by a new policy. It doesn't have to be that way. So yes, you would take on the entire economic cost, but you could structure it in such a way that the current payments that you're making now, which you pay your student loan over a shorter period of time, you would now be paying over a longer period of time. And so your stream of payments monthly would probably be the same under the new system. And I'm not saying that there is a new system to come. I'm merely sharing with you my perspective on what could be a new way of funding tertiary education. It can't happen, and I'm being genuine about this, unless you, the students, lead it. That's the truth. Jamaica is a liberal democracy that depends on consensus. I was in the barbershop recently getting my fade. I used to have my hair like yours. That's long ago. And a fellow beside me in the barbershop said, you have to do drastic things, man, because the country is so disorderly, you have to do drastic things. And I know many Jamaicans feel like that. But the sectoral interests are very entrenched. And something may seem to make sense, it may seem logical, but someone might be at a disadvantage. And so, for me as your Prime Minister, I try to take the time to understand all the sectoral interests before we act. That means that we'll probably be slow. We'll probably not do the things until we get consensus. But when it is done, it will be done the right way. So, tertiary education financing is a topic that has been on the agenda for discussion from I was the Minister of Education and even before that when Maxine Henry Wilson was the Minister of Education. But we have not reached anywhere with it. We are carrying the same model. And every year the same problem exists. Oh, students who are finalizing can't do their exams because. Why? They didn't go and take the student loan. Or there was just not enough money in the student loan, because that was the discussion 4 years ago when the student loan was not properly funded. We can't continue with those uncertain models if we're going to expand access to tertiary education. It is up to your generation to change the thinking, to reach the consensus much faster so that we can do the things that we all know is the right thing, but because of the fear of change. So I just thought I would use this opportunity to share with you my thoughts. My thoughts are different from policy. I want to emphasize that. And it is rare and not recommended that prime ministers especially share their thoughts. But I'm in the place of thinking, so I have to share my thoughts. All right? So there you go. Ready for your questions.
Prime Minister, before we start questions, Minister of Jamaica. Minister?
All right. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, the Minister of Education, the Honourable Senator Royal Reid, or Senator the Honourable Royal Reid, has joined the Prime Minister on stage. So we'll open the floor for questions. We have a few rules, so let's go over them. You raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. We acknowledge you, pass a microphone to you, you identify yourself. You can also tell us the year that you are at university. One question per person, because we want to give as many persons as possible a chance to ask questions. And again, I always say politeness always goes ahead of any great person, all right? So we may now open the floor to questions, unless Minister Reid, would you like to say a few sentences and then we open the floor? All right. Minister Reid says he wants to hear from you, and so does the Prime Minister. So may we have the questions? I see somebody, oh, a hand in the back. All right, the microphone is coming to you. Thank you, Sir Jay. Could you stand so we could see you, please? Yes.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister, Minister of Education. I do not have a question. There is just something I'd like to share with you to hear what you have to say. My daughter had okay. My daughter had an exam this morning. It should have been from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. She went in, she was doing the exam. At 11 o'clock, one of the moderators, I think they're called, went beside her and said, "May I have your paper?" She said, "No, but my exam ends at 12. The person said, "No, time is up." So she gave in the paper. When she called to say, "Mommy, I'm ready," I said to her, "But your exam should have ended at 12. And she said, "Well, that's what the board had, but the lady took her paper from her." I said, "Maybe you got the time wrong." She went, she checked the board beside the tent, and the board did indeed have 9 to 12. So she went back inside and said to the lady, "Well, you know, my exam should have ended at 12, but this other lady took my paper." The long and short is, the campus registrar said that yes, even though the time was supposed to be from 9 to 12, they make changes at the last moment, and they could change it for any time, 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3. But I'm saying, is this a first world sort of mentality? If an exam is supposed to be 3 hours, and at the last minute they change it to 2, is that acceptable?
Thank you so much. But there are two things, and I think the Prime Minister would agree that this is really a question that you ought to direct directly to the administration of the university, because it's an exam situation that was live. So then you'd have to follow that process. But the question then that would come to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education would have to be about things concerning education. That now, specifically, especially since it happened this morning, would be something that you pick up with the university leadership, and some are here at the moment that you could, after this function, do that with. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Well, I mean, clearly I couldn't answer your question, and I can sympathize with you. But you have said it in the place where the university management is hearing clearly. And I'm not going to give them an opportunity to respond to you now. They'll talk to you separately. But as I was saying to Principal McDonald, the government is contemplating a National Examinations Act, a law that governs how examinations are conducted. Might be a little tricky to do it because there are so many examinations. But during my tenure at the Ministry of Education, I'm certain it is now the case, we get many complaints about how examinations are held. The government has a role and probably should intervene because many of these exams lead to national certification. And we need to be able to verify that they have gone through a process that is standard, that is fair and transparent. So we are looking at the issue of setting up a national policy and examination, which would then lead to a national legislation to address how examinations are conducted.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We have another question from the audience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Right. Michaela Gonzalez, President of the Guild of Students. I'll say my thank you when I'm doing the vote of thanks, as in overall for finalizing students. But my question, I'd like the views from both of you on something I was thinking about. So our real contribution to the nation after leaving university comes from what we apply from the theories we would have learned in the classroom. I studied actuarial science for my undergrad. I'm doing my master's in economics. And what I realized is that even when I was studying actuarial science, nobody taught me how to address the problems facing, let us say, even our agricultural sector. So providing insurance for our farmers or the fishermen. And it's not a matter of, at no point was I engaged to solve any problems affecting Jamaica. And I wanted to know the views of maybe working with the university to ensure that in each discipline, there is at least maybe a mandatory course that allows you to engage and provide answers and solutions to various problems affecting our nation. And then you would have that pool as the government to work from, because you may not have everyone being a student leader to stand up here and ask a question, but there may be bright young minds that are willing to give solutions.
A very good question. Surprisingly, the answers that I had given you in my opening statement would apply, which is that if you were to carve out research and development as a distinct function of the university, separate and apart from training, which you have placed the dichotomy quite clearly in your question, that you are being trained, but you are not necessarily being engaged in research and development. A lot of your training should, however, incorporate problem solving, real world problem solving. And that's a function of the university. My experience with the University of the West Indies is that you are called upon to do real world thinking, but especially in your undergrad, it's about understanding the theoretical aspects of things. And then when you get to postgrad, you start to apply, theories that you have learned, study deeper theories, and apply to real world situations. So I think the right balance has to be struck. Principal McDonald is listening, and I'm sure he's understanding the signal that I'm sending, that a more incentivized way of funding the university is to actually say, here are the problems the government needs solving, here is a competition for solutions, and the best solutions get funded. And that's how it is done. I think that's best practice globally, instead of giving one pool of funds which are not necessarily tied to outcomes.
Minister Reid?
Yeah. What I'd like to add to that, Prime Minister, is that we actually, and having visited Australia, we have actually named a committee already to set up what we call a private sector and education and training alignment committee, so that what we actually do, not only in terms of serving the needs of government, but of course of the private sector. So we will have a full integration in terms of what the needs are for government and the private sector, so that it informs how the universities operate. So when you talk about the need for research, the practical experience which will build out, Prime Minister, in this overarching national apprenticeship framework so that the private sector is fully integrated into the education. In fact, it is between government and the private sector, you are signaling how the education and training system should structure its program for the outcome that we see.
All right, thank you so much. Another question, please. Make sure the green light is on.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Lovin Makok. I know the issue with getting tertiary education is very important, but I think one of the problems that students face is after getting the degree and they go into the real world, there's this big thing on the that's asking for your qualifications, and in reality, nobody wants to hire a student fresh out of the university without any qualification, therefore making it impossible.
We're talking about experience.
Sorry,
okay.
Making it almost impossible for students to pay back the student loan. I have friends that cry tears saying they can't pay back because there's no access to no job, because nobody wants somebody fresh out of the university without any form of experience. Now, what I'm asking is what the government or the institution itself can help to eradicate this problem, because it's going to be an ongoing problem where you probably end up in brain drain because of the whole economic aspect, where students are going to want to go somewhere else that is going to appreciate their qualifications. So I want to know what we can do to move forward in order for us to eradicate this problem, because it's a great problem among us youths.
So you've raised up another critical, fundamental issue. And you've actually inadvertently come upon it, and that is the brain drain issue. So when we subsidize university education, specifically the training aspect of it, the divisible aspect of the public good, and then people leave and go abroad, the government doesn't get the benefit of that subsidy. And yes, the truth is that we don't have enough jobs in the economy at this moment. So I can't blame students for seeking their own prosperity elsewhere if they can't get it here. But then the truth is we would have lost the benefit of your skill. A part of the underdevelopment of Jamaica is that some of our best and brightest that we have invested in have left. In a sense, you can't quarrel with them, because probably they would not have made it here because the economy isn't working as it should. So the first thing that the government is focused on is economic growth and job creation. That's priority number one for the government, making sure that the economy is turning so that it can absorb the skills that are being turned out of the university. Now, if we move to a different funding model where you stand the full cost of your training, then it is not an economic loss to the government if you decided to migrate. In fact, the model that is emerging in our universities now is exactly that. So what has happened, and I see it all the time, is that you have some programs where you have a government subsidy applied. And then you have other programs that is called the full fee program. So that means the government subsidy is exhausted, and then the universities will claim the full fee on the additional capacity that they have. That's a model that is going to, in 10 years, supersede, take over as the majority of students. Now, if that is going to be the model, then the government's role is to ensure that the financing for such a model is accessible. Because right now, the financing for that model is my parents can afford it. Or I will go and beg here, beg there, go to the MP, go to this one, go to that one. That is not sustainable, because 1 year, the MP might have to help 10 other persons, so you don't get it, or your mother might not be able to go and borrow the money for you. And so as a finalizing student, you just can't make it. And then the government has to step in, but think about it. The government stepping in is effectively doing what? Funding. It is making a decision effectively to fund. So why not just formalize the arrangement? A new funding model that would make it easier. Because more and more, the full fee model is what is being applied in the universities. And it will continue to be an expanding portion. It's a far more efficient way of using public funds. But to get to your other question, which is, you need experience along with qualifications. So again, the way in which our workforce is structured is that there is no apprenticeship or formal internship. Other countries get around that by having national apprenticeship. The minister mentioned Australia. Australia has an excellent model for apprenticeship. And we have to also, alongside that, develop a model for internships. And we are now doing that. Part of it will be in our national service program, which we intend to roll out. Well, it is being rolled out now as we speak. So, for example, you've just left university. You want to work. It may not be the high-paying job, but you could get a job doing national service, getting experience for your resume. You could do that for a year, and then after that you have 1 year experience doing whatever it is you're going to do under a national service program. So an employee would be able to assess your workplace skills without having to take on the risk of employing someone who has no experience. You see, so we are looking at structuring our labor market in this way. Government is looking at how to do that. And I would say that within another 5 years, there will be programs to assist in the transition from study to work, national apprenticeship and internship.
Pierre, if I may, just to add to that, because I wanted to engage the universe, the population. You already have an example of that with Sutherland Global, which is the BPO, and the high end, which is going to be the BPM, KPO sector. Just to say, I know a lot of university students and graduates will say, okay, it's a lower paying job in terms of entry, but when you talk about work and job experience, these are the type of opportunities that we need to embrace. I believe that we can use this sector. It is already part of the government growth agenda to expand it. There are a number of jobs. I'm trying to get 20,000 persons trained every year to expand the sector. I think Prime Minister has a number of 300,000. We can build that out in terms of informatics and being a major player in ICT. So we are outlining structurally a growth trajectory. Certainly using BPO, there is maritime and logistics that I think is going to be a big part of the economy. I'm very confident that the economy is going to grow significantly in the next couple of years. PM has mentioned it is by ensuring that we focus on growth that is going to make more and more private sector persons interested in making their enterprise available for you to participate in terms of getting those experiences that you so desire. I also say to students, as you are in your communities, and Prime Minister, I also working on the concept of work, that by volunteering, that could very well be part of your resume. Remember also, and as I wrap up, there are a couple of programs that we have while we build out the overall national framework, because there is the NYS Summer Youth Program and Work Program. Then there are also the JAMVAT, that also will provide a framework that you can get job experience. So there are a number of these kind of initiatives. What I find from the university population, there are a number of initiatives that already exist out there, PM, that many of the students themselves are not aware of. So I will seek them out.
All right, and certainly the internet and ministry websites are good resources for them to check to make sure that they see some of those opportunities. So I see a number of hands beckoning. We have about 7 minutes left because we must leave by about 3. So I will acknowledge 3.
Well, before, let me just explain.
Yes.
I have to be in Parliament today.
Yes.
So I'll try to keep my answers short.
Thank you, Prime
That's
Minister.
hard to do, but.
All right, in the front, young lady. Yes, go ahead. Can you
Good
stand for me so
afternoon.
everyone can see you?
Sure. My name is Sharika Taylor. I'm a finalizing law student. I'm also on the Guild as a PRO. And in response to the question Lovin asked, you sort of answered what I'm going to ask, but there's another part to my question. In that, as you mentioned, programs are becoming full fee financing. That's what I'm doing now with, unfortunately, $10,000 which thankfully the university is going to change. I mean, with having that, I wanted to do law, so of course I went to student loan, I have a scholarship, I have a bursary, and I'm still not covering my fees. But it's something that I've accepted, it's my reality, but what I want the government to do, and hopefully that's really your portfolio, is to somehow change the interest rates for the student loan. Because I know that's one of the things that people, they don't want to do. Like,
Perfect
when you look
question.
at the interest rates, it's absolutely ridiculous, but of course, you know, some of us
stop.
have no
So
option.
think a little bit about what I've said earlier. So if the government, every year for the past 15 years or so, took up $10 billion and gave it to the University of the West Indies, UTech, and some teachers' colleges, instead of doing that, there's no opportunity cost that it is losing, so it doesn't need to, charge any interest rates or anything. You could take that and just charge an administrative fee, put that money in the student loan, or a part of it in the student loan. The interest rates that the government could charge on that could be very low, very small. And bear the subsidy on the interest rate rather than on the tuition. See, so the subsidy that the government would give to students would be, we would subsidize the financing. So the financing model could change to make it more affordable for you. But the government would be getting back your payment to put back into the pool so that the pool keeps turning so that future students can get the benefit. That's the model that we're looking at. So you see, you are a perfect example of why the current system is not sustainable.
All right, can we go to the next question, the first gentleman to ask?
Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister, Education Minister. My question is in relation to your thoughts, right? Regarding the idea of utilizing the Student Loan Bureau as a buffer system for payment. Your statement is that you'd fund the Student Loan Bureau in a way that allows for lower interest rates and a longer payment system, similar to a mortgage, right? But my question is that if the students get a loan and they're supposed to pay it back over a longer period of time with a lower interest rate, how is the student loan going to be able to grant loans to persons when they already have not received it after such a long amount of time?
No, so the model is this. The government still maintains its obligation to fund tertiary education. But instead of giving the money to the universities, it would give it to the student loan. So the student loan would be getting the payback plus the government's injection every year. It doesn't cost the government anything. In the current model, the government has to charge a higher interest rate because the government actually borrowed that money. In the last tranche, we took some money from the CDB. And so the student loan has to pay back that interest rate. But this money would be taxpayers' money. But you must pay it back and pay forward as well. The system of ensuring it has been worked on for a long time. And again, I'm saying this is not policy. I'm at the university, the place of thinking, where we explore ideas, we're discussing I'm doing this so that you can go back to your respective places and have a conversation. Sometimes it may end up in a quarrel. But, this is something that has to be discussed in the society. As I said before, consensus has to be built around any such move. You're saying something about the... Right, so ensuring it is... So there are two things that will happen. One already has happened. The credit bureau. It's not as widespread and as effective as it should be, but certainly if we move to that system, we would have to enhance the powers of the credit bureau. The second is the national identification system. So that means you are identified to the state. You will not be able to somehow escape your responsibilities. That way, we limit the risk of lending. And so one of the reasons why you have to charge an interest when you lend money is that there is a risk, the risk of not paying back. A credit bureau helps to reduce the risk of not paying back. And so too does a national identification system. And so the question that you ask, how do we get the interest rate down? We get the interest rate down by removing some of the risks. Again, these are all conversations that the economists and the actuaries and all the people here who have the skills to solve the problem is right here in this room. The things that you have to overcome are your fear of change, culture.
I know Minister Reid wants to come right in. We're dead on 3 o'clock.
Yeah, dead on 3 o'clock. Let me just say, though, supporting PM and his thoughts, that, and Principal MacDonald very well know this, so let me make it publicly, Prime Minister, known, that this conversation we're having here is so important because right across the region, we're facing the same dilemma. Trinidad and Tobago actually has cut this year their subsidy towards the University of West Indies. Barbados is struggling to keep up. So
No. Barbados has cut.
Previously.
And Trinidad has cut.
Very well.
Jamaica has not.
Has not. we have actually been topping up a little bit. Right? So, as PM is saying, this is something that we all have to confront. So we are happy to have this particular dialogue.
All right, thank you so much, Prime Minister. We are thankful that you came, and now we have the vote of thanks by Ms. Michaela Gonzalez.
Okay, good afternoon again, everyone. I could not leave here without publicly saying to everyone, thank you to the Prime Minister and thank you to the Minister of Education, specifically for the assistance they would have provided to our finalizing students. I can tell you it was the hardest battle faced for our guild this year, more so because it just seemed like there was no feasible result that would come from it. And it was such a good feeling to know that we call on you, mind you, not being sure if we'll get an answer, to be honest, but the prompt response, whether it came through favorable or not, I think the interest you showed to our students, I believe it gave that sense of hope that we needed, just to know that the average person, if they need to reach out to you, you have that listening ear. I know the Minister of Education would have helped us right throughout our tenure, so it's not just now that he has been helping, and I look forward to working with him and working with the administration, and just thank you for sharing with us, giving us the young persons a voice at this table, and hopefully tables to come. And I just thank you on behalf of everyone here. And the gift is courtesy of Lorraine Fong Designs.
These are chocolates. Yeah.
Thank you so much, students. Thank you to the administration of the university. Thank you to the students and everyone who worked hard to make this day possible. Certainly the Prime Minister appreciates it. He is off now to the Houses of Parliament, and so we give him the last word.
And my last word is just thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Please think on these things.